Here's your homework. So if you want to do your homework with me, you can. Let's get started and get it done, right? This is a good practice and get it done. All right, so step one, this is a polynomial. We have a 0. We just need to factor it first. So 2 times negative 10 is negative 20. Find the two numbers. If you want to press pause and then think about it or just watch. So that's negative 5 and 4. So that's 2x squared minus 5x plus 4x. And again, you can press pause at any time and do the work yourself, or you follow along with what I'm doing. Factor out an x, and you have 2x subtract 5. Factor out a 2, and you have 2x subtract 5. So then we put it all together, and what do you got? That's what you got. So there it is, 2x subtract 5 and x plus 2. What are the zeros in that? So positive 5 over 2, so like 2.5. And negative 2. So those are my intervals, 3 of them. Pick a number on the left interval, any number on the left, and just test for the sign. So plug in a negative number, negative 6. Gives you a negative times a negative. And that's what I'm looking for. And if it's not what I'm looking for, I'm not going to put it down. Plug in 0. That's a negative times a positive, which is negative. I don't want it. Plug in a number bigger here, like positive 4 or bigger, and you get a positive times a positive. And so I'm just looking for the positive intervals because it's greater than or equal to 0. So the first interval goes from negative infinity to here, negative 2. And negative 2 is included. And then the second interval starts at 5 over 2. And it goes to infinity. Those intervals give you a positive answer, and that's what I'm looking for. Number 2. Step number 1, it's 0 on the right side. Can I factor this? So that's 4 times 9, and negative 37. So that is negative 36 and negative 1. So negative 36 and negative 1. Be careful of the exponents. That's x to the squared and x to the fourth. Factor out a 4x squared, and you have x squared minus 9. Factor out a negative 1, and you have x squared minus 9. So I get a bunch of difference of squares here. So 4x squared subtract 1 is a difference of squares. 2x plus 1, 2x minus 1. X squared subtract 9 is a difference of squares. X plus 3, x minus 3. So whatever you can do to just cut the corner a bit to get the factors, that's what I'm looking for. What are the zeros here? So subtract 1 and divide by 2. Add 1 and divide by 2. So those are the negative a half and positive a half. So that kind of surrounds 0. And then we have negative 3 and positive 3. All right, test for signs. So on the left, put in a negative number. Now, if you put in negative 8 all the way across, it's a negative times a negative times a negative. That actually gives me a positive answer. I'm not looking for it, so I'm going to write it down. The next interval, I see negative 2, so I'll plug negative 2 with the next interval. So negative 2 gives me a negative times a negative, but negative 2 gives me a positive times a negative. So if I put this together, I actually get a negative answer, which is what I'm looking for. Plug 0 in for the next interval, and you get a positive answer. I'm not looking for it. Plug in positive 2, and you get a negative answer, which is what I'm looking for. And then if you plug in a number positive 4 or bigger, every factor will be positive, which will give you a positive answer. So I'm looking for the negative answers. So the answer goes from negative 3 to negative a half. And it goes from positive a half to 3. Done. All right, number 3. Factor it to begin with. So I'm going to factor out an x squared. Then I got negative 20, negative 3 times 7 is negative 21. In fact, I'm going to factor out a negative in front so I can factor it easier. So if I factor it a negative x squared, it makes this power term positive to factor, way easier. So it becomes a positive, and a negative. So it's still negative 21 and 20. So I'm still going to have positive 21 and negative 1. But I have a negative x squared, positive 3x squared, 21x, and negative 1x. So the first two terms, 3x, and then negative 1, x plus 7, and then we're going to finish it off. So we have x plus 7 and 3x subtract 1. Done. Less than or equal to 0. All right, so I know that's work, not easy work. Can you factor it to here, less than or equal to 0? So negative x squared, the 0 is 0. That's negative 7, and that's positive 1/3, which is just a teeny one in there. So I need to pick a number in each interval. So first I'm going to pick like negative 8. So if I pick that, it's a negative. This will always be a negative answer. So a negative times a negative times a negative. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the negative answer. So that first one works. Pick a number in the next interval, like negative 2. If I pick in negative 2, it'd be a negative times a positive times a negative. That actually gives you a positive answer. I'm not going to put it down. The next one, got to be careful here. So it's 1/3 and 1/3 between 0 and 1/3. So like 1/4 would be a number in there. So if you put in 1/4, you'd get a negative times a positive times a negative. So that's you get a negative times a positive times a negative, which is a positive answer. Right? Making sure. And then the last one, if you put in a number like 2, you get a negative, a positive times a positive. So that's a negative answer too. So I'm looking for the negative answers. So those are my two negative answers. So it goes from negative infinity to negative 7. And it goes from, that's 1/3 to infinity. And that's what gives you a positive answer. Just double checking this little interval. So from 0 to 1/3, I picked a quarter. That's a negative times a positive times a negative. So a negative, that's a positive answer. So yeah. All right, I feel good about that. Number 4. I got to do a list. So I need all the numbers that go into 25. This is that rational zero theorem. So, and then 2, and then divide. I'm so going to help you through this. So if you're watching the video, I'm just going to help you through to do it. So the number that works here is negative 5. I don't want you to suffer through that. So that's 2 and negative 10. That's 11 and negative 55. And that's what gives you 0. Then what's left over is 2x squared plus 11x plus 5. So if I factor that, that's 10 and 11. So the two numbers that multiply to 10 and add to 11 there. So that's 2x squared and 1x and 10x and 5. So now I can, I think, be close to putting it all together. So factor up that common factor. So if I put them all together, negative 5 is x plus 5. Then 2x plus 1. Then x plus 5 again. So it's x plus 5 squared. And that's greater than 0. So there's actually only 2 zeros here, from negative 5, and the other one is negative 1/2. So those are my 3 intervals. So 1, if I plug in a number like negative 8, a number here on the left, it's anything squared is going to be positive. So this is always positive. So it's a positive times a negative. pick a number in this interval like -2. So I don't even want it, so I don't even know why I wrote it in. If you picked a number like -2, again, it would give you a positive times a negative. I don't want it. Pick a number like 0, and you get a positive answer. So the only interval that's positive is on the far right. So it starts at -0.5, and it goes to infinity. So from -0.5 to infinity, you get a positive answer, which is what I'm looking for. Done. Number 5. Step 1, this has to be 0. So I'm going to add 5 to the other side. So it's 12x cubed. We have minus 10x squared and subtract 12x. So I'm going to rearrange this so it's 0 on the right side. Factor out a 2x, and you're left with 6x squared minus 5x minus 6. So that's negative 36 and negative 5. So it's negative 9 and 4. So it's negative 9 and 4. Factor by grouping. Factor out a 3x. Factor out a 2. And then keep going. So you have 2x, you have x minus 3, and 3x plus 2. So there they are. Now 2x gives you 0. That x subtract 3 gets you positive 3 is a 0. And that's negative 2/3 over here. So test each interval. We have a tiny interval in the middle. So plug in what you want on the left. So if you plug in -8, it's a negative, a negative, a negative. That gives you a negative answer, which is what I'm looking for. Plug in a fraction between negative 2/3 and 0. So like negative 1/3 would be that in the middle. That'd be a negative times a positive. So that gives you a positive answer, which I don't want. Plug in 2 in the next interval. So a positive times a negative times a positive, that gives you a negative answer. That's what I'm looking for. If you plug in any number bigger than 3, it'll be a positive times a positive times a positive. I don't want it. I just want the negative intervals. So that goes from negative infinity to negative 1/3 or 2/3. And the next interval that's negative goes from 0 to 3. So those are the two intervals. Wait a second. Yeah. What did I do wrong here? This should be a 2x minus 3. That's what I did wrong. This should be positive 3 over 2. You're going to get the same signs. But this should be positive 3 over 2, like 1.5 right there. So you're going to get the same answer. It's still going to be like the negative, but this should be positive 3 over 2. Did you catch that mistake I made? Add 3, divide by 2. So if you pick a number and put it in, you're still going to get a negative answer here from 0 to 3 over 2. So if you pick like 1 and you put it in here, you're going to get a negative answer, and then the last interval is going to be positive. All right, last one here with polynomials. It needs to be 0 on the right side. So that's 7x cubed subtract 2. So that's 5x cubed. Subtract 2x squared. Subtract 20x. Subtract 3. And there you go. Factor that. Again, you need a list. No, I think it's factor this by grouping. So x squared, and you're left with 5x minus 2. That's going to be negative 4, and you have 5x minus 2, so it is factorable by grouping. So I have 5x minus 2. X squared subtract 4 is a difference of squares, so it's x plus 2, x minus 2. So we can cut a corner there. And then we have 2/5, negative 2, and positive 2. So on the left, if you like plugged in negative 8, you'd have a negative times a negative times a negative. So that's going to give you a negative answer. I don't want it. Plug in the next interval like 0, and 0 is going to give you a positive answer, which is what I want. So this interval is good. Plug in a number like 1 in the next interval. Positive 1 gives you a positive, and a negative. So that gives you a negative answer, which I don't want. Plug in a big number that's positive for the next interval, and everything is positive. And that's what I'm looking for greater than or equal to 0. So it starts with negative 2, and it goes to 2/5. And it's brackets. So negative 2 to 2/5. The next one starts at 2 and goes to infinity. And we're using brackets because of that equal sign underneath the arrow. So that's solving polynomial inequalities. So the last part of the homework. Where's the last part of the homework? Is that the same page? Oh no. Don't tell me here. Oops. How about this one? We got 6. There's number 7. I knew I printed it out. All right, so there's number 7 for the homework. I got this. All right, number 7. These are the rational ones. So now it's the zeros at the top and bottom. So that's positive 3 and positive 1. But positive 1 is an asymptote. And then test the intervals. So if I put in a negative number in this interval, I get a negative divided by a negative, which is positive. I don't want that. Plug in 2. And I get a negative answer, which is what I'm looking for. If you plug in a number bigger than 3, everything's positive, and I don't want a positive answer. So I'm just looking for the negative answer. So the answers go from positive 1 to 3, and that's it. So only positive 1 to 3 will give you a negative answer. Number 8. Step 1 is to factor it. So that's going to be plus 6 and minus 2. The next step are the zeros. So the numerator, it's 0. The denominator is negative 6 and positive 2. Pick a number. So pick negative 8. And everything is negative. So a negative times a negative is positive. And a negative divided by positive. So that's a negative answer. Plug in negative 4. So plug a number in the next interval. That's a negative, a positive, a negative. So all that will give you a positive answer, which is what I'm looking for. Plug between 0 and 2. So positive 1. So take your time. Positive 1 gives you a negative answer. And then if you plug in a number on the right side, everything will be positive. And that's what I'm looking for. So let's go here. This goes from negative 6 to 0. That 0 is a bracket. And it goes from 2 to infinity. And just 0 is going to be that bracket because of that, not the asymptotes. All right, number 9. Step 1 is to factor this. That's positive 8 and negative 1. So negative 3 on top, negative 8, and positive 1. So nice easy intervals. Notice that this goes to the left as well, so I need to plug in negative 9. Notice that if everything is negative, it'll lead to a negative answer. That's what I want. The next interval, negative 6, one of these is going to end up being positive. So that will lead to a positive answer. I don't want the positive answer. Plug in 0. If you plug in 0, you get a negative answer. And then plug in 2. And if you go here and plug in 2, you'll get a positive answer. But I'm just looking for the negative answers. So it goes from negative infinity to negative 8, which is asymptote. And then it goes from negative 3, which is intercept, to positive 1, which is an asymptote. So it's negative infinity, negative 8, negative 3 to 1. Number 10. So step 1 in number 10 is to factor. So in the denominator, two numbers that multiply to negative 20 and add to negative 1, that's negative 5 and 4. Now, bunch of zeros here. So x is a 0, negative 5 is a 0, positive 5, and negative 4. So like a ton of intervals that we have to look at. We're just looking at the ones that give me a negative answer. So if I plug in negative 8, everything is negative. A negative times a negative times a negative. We need to be quickly thinking with signs, and this gives me a positive answer. I don't want it. Pick a number between negative 5 and negative 4. So you're looking at like negative 4.5. And for that, I'm just looking at the signs. You have a negative times a negative, but a negative times a negative times a positive. So because it's a negative times a positive, this will actually give you a negative answer, that little interval. We want that interval. Pick a number in this interval like negative 2. And if you go negative 2, it's a negative times a positive and a negative times a positive. So altogether, that gives you a positive answer. I don't want it. Pick positive 2, and everything is positive but one factor, so that makes it negative altogether. And then if you pick a big positive number, everything is positive. So I just want the negative intervals. So again, those negative intervals go from negative 5 to negative 4. And then this one is 0 to 5. So negative 5 to negative 4 and 0 to 5 are the ones that give me my negative answers. All right, 2 left for the homework. We can do this. So I need this to be 0 on the other side. So I have negative 3x and 43, x plus 7, subtract 5. So now I have the 0 by subtracting 5, but I need common denominators. So it's going to be x plus 7, top and bottom. So to put it as one fraction, it would be negative 3x, negative 5x. That's negative 8. It would be 43, take away 35. So that's also negative 8. And if you want, you could factor out the negative 8 so you can see what the 0 is. So you have negative 8, or is that plus 8? No, this was plus 8. So that means this would be minus 1. So x minus 1. So I need to know the 0 on top and the 0 on the bottom. So on the top, it is positive 1. And on the bottom, it's negative 7. So that's going to create my intervals. Negative 7 and positive 1. So plug in negative 8, and you get a negative times a negative and another negative. So all of that is leading to a negative answer, which I don't want. Plug in 0. Well, if you plug in 0, that's the easiest one. So 0 gives me a positive because a negative times a negative. So it gives me a positive over a positive. I am looking for that. And then one more interval. If I plug in positive 2, I get a negative over a positive. So I don't want that interval. So the only interval where it's greater than or equal to 0 is from negative 7 to 1. And then think about, are they brackets or not? So negative 7 is an asymptote, but positive 1 is not. So the positive 1 will be a bracket because it's an intercept. Negative 7 is an asymptote, so it's going to be parentheses. All right, last one, number 12. So step 1, need to have a 0 on the other side. So I'm going to subtract that fraction, and so there's a 0 over here. I need common denominators, so I'm going to use the other denominator to do that. So let me do that for you. So now that I have common denominators, combine these together as one fraction. So 4x subtract 3x is 1x, and negative 28 plus 24. It's negative 4. All right, now we got one fraction. And I'm just looking for the positive interval. So the intervals are positive 4, positive 8, and positive 7. So they're all over here positive, all here on the right. So if I plug in 0, I get a negative, and a negative times a negative is positive. So a negative and a positive gives me a negative answer. Don't want it. Plug in a number here, like positive 5, and if you take your time, it'll be a negative times a negative on the bottom. This is going to give you a positive answer. I want that. If I plug in a number bigger than 8, like 9 or 10 or whatever, that will also give me a positive answer. If I plug in negative 7 or positive 7.5 in here, you get a negative answer. So I'm looking for the positive intervals. So they go from 3, no, that's not 3, that's a 4. That goes from 4 to 7, and it goes from 8 to infinity. So 4 to 7, 8 to infinity. It's just greater than, so they're all parentheses. And that's it. You did your homework. It's all over. I'm so proud of you. Thank you for doing your work. There's my pen. All good. Go Lady Rajas. Mr. G Math. Over and out. Till next time.